Hey, happy Thursday. Come on in. Pull up a chair. The Daily Dope is in the air. Howdy, gang. Yes, I'm Jeff McAleer, back once again as your host here at The Daily Dope, presented by thegaminggang.com. My apologies, I started doing the stream tonight just a few moments ago, and I kind of keep an eye on dropped frames as far as the stream goes, because if there's any sort of like hiccup in the internet service provider or anything like that, then suddenly, all of a sudden, the finished rendered video is going to just be a mess, right? So it's just all of a sudden I'm saying one thing and it jumps ahead and things like that. So it looked like it was dropping a lot of frames to start off the show. So I did make some tweaks to some of the settings. So I am taking a look right now. I am not showing any drop frames. So hopefully that took care of business for us tonight. Anyway, welcome aboard. Today is Thursday, January 10th, 2019. This is episode 226 of The Daily Dope. So, if this is your first time joining me, kick back, relax. This is a very, very casual show. I just talk about tabletop games, a little bit of geek culture stuff from time to time. Gotta be honest, 2019, I am gonna talk a little bit more every once in a while about some cool stuff that I run across. Because, like, for an example, there was something I saw today that just... I got all, a little misty-eyed and really made me feel great. But I'm not going to talk about it yet. I'm going to talk about it because I ordered something from this charity. So I'm actually going to share that when it arrives and talk a little bit about the charity itself. So just so you know, 2019, every once in a while, I'll probably talk about something that's not exactly geek culture related. Anyway, tonight I am going to be reviewing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition from my friends over at Cubicle 7 Entertainment. Why couldn't I get that out of my mouth? And Games Workshop. So that is coming up in just a few moments. I know I had kind of previewed today's show by saying that I was going to talk about 5 highly anticipated role-playing games for 2019, and there are a bunch of role-playing games that I'm pretty pumped are coming out this year. Unfortunately, not a ton of info that I could find, just kind of peeking around the internets, the interwebs. So I'll probably push that off till next week, because I don't want to talk about something then just sit there and talk about it for 5 minutes with one little image sitting there on the screen. That'll be extremely boring. That won't be fun at all. Anyway, before I jump into my review, let me point out that this is a live stream. If you are watching live, by all means, feel free to take part in chat. Chat is available on YouTube. It is not on screen. It's one of the ways that I keep some of these stranger commenters at bay, but I do pay attention to the chat. So if you want to say hello, or if you have a question, or maybe there's something about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition you want to find out about that I haven't talked about, then by all means, chime on in. Okay, so on tomorrow's show, I am actually going to be unboxing and taking a first look at Master of Wills, which is from Stormcrest Games, a company that I am not familiar with, but this is for 2 to 4 players. Looks like it's kind of a superhero-ish, cyberpunkish setting. So it looks pretty interesting as each of the factions, I believe it's 2 factions, so if you're playing 4 players, I think it's 2 teams, but these factions are like vying for control. So should be kind of interesting, and there's actually quite a bit of heft to this box, even though it's not real deep. Then on Monday's show, I am going to review Nemo's Wars 2nd edition from Victory Point Games. Yes, that's right. I finally got myself a copy of the 2nd edition. And also the first little expansion pack of cards, too. So I will be reviewing this on Monday's show, so don't miss out. Tuesday's show, I'm going to review Battlestar Galactica. Yes, the miniatures game from Ares Games that just recently came out. I will give you my thoughts on that next Tuesday. Got other stuff in the works. I think Wargame Wednesday I might do an unboxing of Talon 1000 from GMT, kind of up in the air on that. And I think next Thursday I'm gonna do a PDF review. I think I might do like an RPG adventure review in PDF. Throw some love out there to some of these companies that do a lot of their business through electronics, digital media, as opposed to everything happening to be in print. All right, so enough of that. I know folks are tuning in because they want to see Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. As mentioned, it's from Cubicle 7 Entertainment and Games Workshop. Get ready for all the mispronounced names. Ready? Because it is designed by Dave Allen, Gary Astleford, Graham Davis, Jude Hornborg, Andrew Law, Lindsay Law, Andrew Leask. I think it's Leask. Hey, wait a second here. For crying out loud, I thought I cleared these out. Oh, this is what happens when you're running late, running around. Okay, so here's the weird thing, right? So I come downstairs, I'm getting everything ready. One of the last things I always do is I turn the camera on, make sure that, the sound is in sync, stuff like that. And I was like, wow, you know what? I look like, I got this stubble tonight for some strange reason. Yeah, I shaved this morning. I don't know what's going on. A lot of stubble today. I don't know why. Anyway, so that was kind of throwing me off. Do I run upstairs and shave or be late or whatever? So kind of threw me off. So I forgot to clear those other images out. Hey, it's a live show. What can I tell you? Anyway, continuing the designer parade, T.S. Lukart. Hey, T.S. buddy. I usually get to see T.S. and chat with him at Gen Con every year. My pal Dominic McDowell. How's it going, Dom? Hope you check out the video. As well as Clive Oldfield. Artwork is provided by Dave Alsip, Paul Bourne, Michael Franchina, Andrew Hepworth, John Hodgson. John's actually moved on from Cubicle 7, started his own company very recently. Ralph Horsley, Andrew Law, Pat LeBoyko, Sam Manley, and Scott Purdy. The 352-page hardcover is available for $59.99. The PDF is available from Drive-Thru RPG at a sale price right now during their New Year New Game sale. You can get it for $20.99 as opposed to the regular price of $29.99. And as I always like to point out whenever I'm talking about Drive-Thru RPG or any of the drive-thru sites, the Gaming Gang and thus the Daily Dope are affiliates of the Drive-Thru site. So if you are going to visit Drive-Thru RPG or Cards or Fiction or Wargame Vault, what have you, DM's Guild, please stop by thegaminggang.com, click on one of our banners. That way, if you do happen to make a purchase, I get a little piece of that purchase. Very small, very little. Usually, could be like a dime. But I keep telling everybody, it all adds up, really helps out a lot. You'd be surprised. Get 1,000 dimes? Hey, not too shabby, right? All right, so let me grab a sip here. Because it's kind of dry as usual in the Duct Tape Studios. It's also chilly down here. It's gotten cold in Chicago the past few days. It was really nice for a while. High 30s, low 40s, and not anymore. Now with the wind, it's about 0. So, all right, come on. What's going on? There we go. Jeez, trying to get over to the other camera here. All right, so this is the hardcover edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Really nice, really nicely done. Gotta point out. Really think the production quality of this is top notch. Usually, Cubicle 7, I've never had a complaint with the quality of the components to any of their board games, or of course their main bread and butter are RPG books, and always really nice. Although here's one thing I think is a little weird, or not maybe weird, but I'm surprised sometimes is that there is no bookmark, which is like a big thing with hardcover gaming books that are manufactured in Europe. Free League does it, Modifius Entertainment does it, and Ulysses Spiel, or Ulysses North America, although their books are produced over in Europe. So I was a little surprised, a little bit surprised. I'm not going to like ding it. I'm not going to ding the review score because it doesn't happen to have a bookmark. All right, getting a little bit of glare. Let's see here. Let's try. Every once in a while, if I kind of angle the book a little bit as I go through it, we don't get as much glare. But I don't know. A little bit less, I think. Yeah, we're still gonna get a bit. Well, I changed up the lighting so that we would have much better lighting on some stuff. So I switched cameras very recently too. So, all right, I'll try to kind of angle stuff, kind of angle the book a little bit so that we don't get tons and tons of glare. All right, so first off, this new 4th edition is set in the old world. This is not Age of Sigmar. Age of Sigmar, actually, Cubicle 7 is working on a role-playing game that's going to be devoted to Age of Sigmar. But this is really steeped in the old world of Warhammer Fantasy. And this really does go and draw a lot of inspiration from the 1st and 2nd editions of the game, as opposed to the 3rd edition, which was produced by Fantasy Flight Games for quite some time. The 1st edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay came out in, I want to say, 1986. I had the first book. I had the first core book. I think I had some of the adventures. I didn't have a lot of them. I never ran it because the vast majority of the time I ran Call of Cthulhu, still do. But I did have the book. But I know it wasn't 1986. I think it had probably been out for a couple of years when I picked it up. All right, so we've got an introduction, kind of talking about, okay, so what's going on with the system itself. Throwing Bones talks about the main dice that you're going to be utilizing. You're basically looking at your 10-siders. A lot of this is based on percentile dice. Got to point out, I really like the artwork to this book. I think the artwork is very, very nicely done. A variety of different artists. Some people may not dig the vast majority of the artwork. It's not like anime or manga influenced like, say, Pathfinder's artwork is, which I'm not a fan of Pathfinder's art. I'm hoping the 2nd edition, they kind of move away from that, go a little more realistic artwork. But kind of get a feel for the old world in this introduction. Thought it was kind of cool that Cubicle 7 and Games Workshop went in this direction as far as kind of an introduction, as opposed to just giving you a wall of flavored text, a wall of story. So once we got through that, now we start talking about some of the various different aspects of the old world, like gods and witches, what it's like to live out, what rural life is like. So we get into characters. Now, a great chunk of this book, a great chunk of the 352 pages of this book are going to be devoted to characters and careers. Some people might be thrown off by the sheer number of pages that are devoted to characters, character generation, as well as the careers, skills, things like that. About 70 pages make up that portion of the book. Now, got to point out, it gives you a lot of different options. Something that's very different in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay that you don't see in games like, let's say, Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons, especially 5th edition. The characters are pretty much just kind of regular folk, maybe just a step above regular folk. And a lot of times they're going to begin with some just really kind of average sort of careers. So what happens is, just like most famous fantasy literature, the characters, your protagonists, they begin as just regular Joes and Janes. It's not just super high epic fantasy. Characters are not going to, end up at 20th level where they could battle the pantheon of gods, to take their place or anything like that. I happen to enjoy the kind of grittier feel of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I also want to point out there's a bit of humor. I didn't encounter as much humor, I guess. Then again, I'm not all that well versed in all things Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay over the decades. I didn't find as much kind of tongue-in-cheek humor in 4th edition as I do remember in like the 1st edition back in the day when I had that. All right, so going through, just kind of talking about, okay, these are the different abbreviations, the different attributes. And as I mentioned before, pretty much the main gist of the mechanics of the game is going to be percentile dice based. Now, there is an option for you to randomly generate your character. And when I say randomly generate your character, I'm talking completely randomly generating your character from what is their background, as far as their kin. I know a lot of people don't like using the term race anymore, and I can understand that. So as far as what culture they may be from, right? All the way up to what is their career. You're randomly determining the attributes. You can even randomly determine what their career is. Everything completely random. And if you do something like that, you're actually rewarded for it, which I thought was kind of interesting. Now, as we go through the book, you're going to find that there are quite a few little sidebars and side boxes talking about optional rules. As far as the crunch in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, I would have to say I find it falls between, say, 5th edition and Pathfinder. It is crunchier than 5th edition. It is not as crunchy as Pathfinder, at least this edition of Pathfinder. I have not gotten a chance to really dive too far into the playtest for 2nd edition of Pathfinder, so I don't know if they've kind of streamlined a lot of stuff or things like that. All right, so we're talking about class and careers. Of course, I have no class, so that's okay. Another interesting aspect of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is that once you choose a career, you're not locked into that career. In fact, in a lot of ways, you're actually encouraged to branch out and take on a different career at some point in your adventuring lifetime. So pretty cool. I mean, there's just so much packed into this book. There is loads and loads of information that's packed in this book. There is artwork throughout, but one thing that you're not going to see is you're not going to see tons and tons of two-page splashes. You don't see a lot of full-page artwork. There is a lot of stuff packed in here, and there are loads and loads of options available. In fact, in some ways, I think there's too many of these optional boxes here. And I will talk about that a little bit when I give my summary of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. So we're going to go through, taking a look at all the various different classes that are available. And it's going to also have what cultures are available to take on this class. So as in, say, old school D&D, you'll find that there are certain classes, certain occupations that certain cultures cannot engage in. So as we go through here, you're going to see, wow, look at, there's all these sort of like, kind of like, okay, like a nun, right? Physician, a priest, a scholar. How action-packed is that, right? Wizard, agitator, a rabble-rouser, right? The rabble-rouser here. Beggar. There's a rat catcher. I love the rat catcher. Reading through this, and okay, you'll have to excuse my French for a second here. I don't tend to swear much on the show, but there's a rat catcher right there. Looking through here, when I see this, right? When I saw this artwork, I kept thinking to myself of the scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where it's sort of like, where they're in the town, and it's like, oh, that must be the king. And it's like, oh, really? How do you know? And it's like, well, he's not all covered in shit. So, kind of, that's kind of what pops into my head as far as a little bit of the setting for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all. I mean, it's more gritty, it's more down to earth. There are still loads of fantastic elements to the game, but people tend to be people. So you got Watchman, Advisor, Artist, Duelist, Envoy, Noble. There are firearms in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Not, we're talking kind of like flintlocks, but there are firearms. So going through just some of them: Hunter, Miner, Mystic, the classic cultures, fantasy role-playing cultures are available. You got your dwarves, you got your elves, you got your half elves, you got your halflings. You got the different kinds of elves. So flagellant. Okay, all right. Peddler. Now, okay, so here's the thing too. I'm not sure if that's like a misprint there or what. I mean, maybe that's how it's supposed to be spelled. Something to point out that people don't, I'm sure some people aren't going to realize, this was actually supposed to release back at Gen Con last year. And it just wasn't ready yet. And I have to give Cubicle 7 a lot of credit. And I know they took some flack because they were selling the PDF online. And they came out and they said, hey, you know what? This is not completely done yet. We're still working on things. We're still cleaning stuff up. But we want to bring this out and make it available to you because it is almost completely finished. And some folks were like, well, it's almost like it's a beta and things like that, which it was not. There were just a few things that still needed to be tweaked and a few things that needed to be added. That said, the physical editions of the book did not arrive until late last year, and some stores were still just receiving them as we moved into January. But I gotta say, I like the fact that Cubicle 7 decided, hey, we are not going to push this out there if it's not ready. Now, I interviewed my friend Dominic McDowell over at Gen Con last year, and we talked about the fact that this wasn't arriving in hardcover. It was out in PDF at that point, but the hardcover books weren't available yet. And trust me, if Cubicle 7 could have gotten this book out to sell at Gen Con, it would have sold out. They would have sold tons of them, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. But kudos to Cubicle 7 for not sitting there and saying, well, you know what, we need to make the money. We need to strike while the iron's hot here and make our money at Gen Con. And if we have to, I like that. Amiga Fanatic 1980. Man, there are so many classes. There are. Not only are there a bunch of classes, you got a bunch of different career paths that the characters can utilize as well. But that's as I mentioned earlier, a few minutes ago, about 70 pages or so are devoted to simply the character creation and the various different character classes and careers. But anyway, I was going to say, I'm really, I'm really happy to see that Cubicle 7 didn't just go for a money grab and say, all right, well, you know what? We'll print up these books. They'll be full of errors. There'll be things that are still missing. And then we'll just say, oh, well, go download the errata sheet online, print it out, shove it in your book, and you're all set. A lot of companies would have done that. Gotta admit, Cubicle 7 did not just go for the easy cash grab. Okay, so then we go into skills and talents. Quite a few of the skills, not as many as, say, in Chaosium's basic role-playing, Call of Cthulhu, things like that. But there are a few. There are a few skills in here. Then we start getting into different languages. Going through the different skills here. Then we got different talents. So talents is kind of, the way you separate the talents and the skills is sort of, talents are kind of raw ability, whereas the skills are, the characters have been trained in them. We're doomed! So we got things like dirty fighting, enclosed fighter, fast hands, fast shot, hatred of group, holy hatred. All right, so got quite a lot of these as well. Okay, so we have gone, how many pages are we? 147 pages before we actually get into the rules. And some of this, of course, yes, some of it was a little bit of background, but a vast majority of this was just the characters, the skills, the careers, all of that. So you can't have any players out there saying, well, you know what? I just don't feel I've got enough options in this game as far as the kind of character to play, because there are tons and tons of options for you. Plus, as I mentioned, you can completely randomly roll up a character and just go with it. And, you kind of benefit from that. You'll get some rewards for that as well. So now we get into the rules. And here's the funny thing. The rules themselves are like 40 pages. Because there isn't like a whole ton to the rules. Kind of like so here's the golden rule, basically saying, and every role-playing game has this golden rule. Hey, use the rules you like, throw out the rules you don't like. If a rule's making the game less fun for everybody, just throw it away. Just, do whatever you want. To me, the golden rule here in the game, for the most part, is percentile dice. So talking about resolving actions, talking about great game rules, tests above 100%. So you've got success levels, which is not unusual. We see this a lot as far as success levels in games. So for an example, in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in the 4th edition here, you'll find your success level by rolling your percentile dice. So let's say that your character has a skill of 65 to do something, and you roll a 12. Well, what you do is you throw away your single digit die, and you subtract the number that you got compared to your skill. So for an example, if you had a 65 and you rolled a 15, well, you got a success level of 5. So that's good. Wow, that's really well done. Flip that around, and you also have negative success levels, which to me, basically, I consider those failure levels. So let's say, for an example, you had a 25% chance of doing something, and you roll an 85. Well, now you've got a success level of -6. And of course, the game does talk about how do you utilize these success levels. And one of the ways that you'll utilize the success level is in combat doing damage. Now, one of the things that a lot of folks have had kind of an issue with, uh, especially with the first edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, was every weapon kind of did the same exact damage. And people were like, well, wait a second, how could a two-handed sword, let's say a two-handed bastard sword, do the same damage as a sling? Well, that's where the success levels come into play. So as we get into combat, we see that there are a lot of different options here, a lot of these different optional sidebars, side boxes. You can also change, as I was talking about, you've got, like, say you've got an 85 to your skill to do something. Well, of course, the game master, they can make adjustments as well, so they can add or subtract to that also. So then we start getting into things like conditions, which we see more and more role-playing games talking about different conditions, like being drunk, being knocked unconscious, being stunned, being tired, being hungry, which we didn't necessarily see that back in the day. So we're starting to see a lot of that. And then we got fate and resilience. So there's fate and fortune. Think of it kind of along the lines of bennies or fate points. So you got your bennies in Savage Worlds, you got your fate points in Fate. We'll point out that they don't change the whole dynamic as much as the bennies would or fate points do. We're talking about wounds, critical wounds, death. We got critical hit tables. Earlier in the book, there was a hit location. Talking about broken bones, torn muscles, amputated parts, medical attention. Do want to point out, combat's pretty deadly in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Once again, we are kind of going towards that kind of dark and gritty feel. It's not as if you're, level 15 in 5th edition and you're kind of like a walking tank, no matter what your class is. A little bit different. Then, of course, we've got chaos and the problems that chaos brings about. So we got disease and infection. We're going to get into magic in just a bit. And one of the aspects of magic that I think is pretty cool is the fact, and this is something that I kind of dig, and I guess maybe it's my personal taste as far as fantasy. I always like when magic holds a little bit of a danger to the magic user. I really kind of get a kick out of how Dungeon Crawl Classics does some of their spell casting, although I think they go a little bit overboard. But I do like the fact where it's like, the more magic that you use, not necessarily they become corrupted by it, but you become changed by it. So a little bit of that aspect in this as well. So right here, we're going through just kind of like between adventures, kind of like downtime stuff, purchasing things. Then we got religion, talking about the chaos gods, the different cults. One thing that you have to admit was when you're looking at Warhammer Fantasy, you have decades of backstory, decades of supplements and adventures you can draw from. 4th edition, and of course, Cubicle 7 does have the rights to the 1st and 2nd edition adventures, which they have been releasing for Warhammer. I'm not sure if it's all of them, but I think it is. So even if you've got old adventures, maybe you've been role-playing for a long, long time, and you've got some old adventure books from either 1st or 2nd edition, you're not going to have to revamp them a whole lot to be able to use them. That was one thing I thought was kind of cool. I mean, things are different. Now, remember, I have not read through the 1st edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in 25 years, probably. But I do remember kind of the sense of humor that it had. This sort of like anti-Dungeons and Dragons vibe it had, which is kind of what the what really the end game was when Games Workshop started working on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, was to kind of make it an anti-D&D, to make it more gritty, more realistic, more down in the dirt, less high fantasy than a lot of D&D was. But something also to keep in mind is that with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, you're not looking at your characters becoming, world killers and things like that. You will see your characters, advance, pick up new skills, become much more proficient at what they do. But it's never going to get to the point where it's sort of like, well, Bob the mage is now Bob the demigod. So here we go, talking about spells. We're into the magic a little bit, magic rules. So we've got miscasting tables. So we got minor miscast, major miscast. Some of the magic that's in the game is a bit darker too. A little darker tone to it. Not as many spells as you're going to find in many other fantasy role-playing games, especially like 5e or Pathfinder. But there's a good amount of spells here. There's a good amount of, they're miracles for the priests, so like clerical spells. So then we've got kind of different schools of magic as well. So you've got kind of like generalized spells that pretty much a variety of different casters can learn. Another aspect too is that you don't necessarily have to be a magic user per se to be able to use spells, but of course they have a full range of spells available to you. Yes, you have to be some sort of a magic user. So we got different like witch magic, chaos magic, dark magic. So we've got all of this stuff. All these pages really have been devoted to the players. Right? Now we get to about the last 100 pages or so, a little less than 100 pages, are going to be information for the game master. So talking about general advice at the table. We've got I think it's pronounced Reikland. I'm not positive. I don't think it's Reichland. I think it's Reikland. So, and of course, that is the setting for the old world in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So we get a bit of a timeline. So there's a lot of background. So the amount of pages that are devoted specifically, to running the game from a game master's perspective isn't a lot. There isn't a ton. Which some people will kind of be a little upset about. Some people won't dig that. Myself, personally, usually most of the stuff that you really need to run the game are going to be in the players section. The only thing that usually you want to have that's in the game master section are going to be like kind of secrets of the realm sorts of things. And more than likely the bestiary. I prefer not to have my players know about the monsters and creatures and things like that occupy the world, especially if the characters are pretty much, just kind of like starting off as country bumpkins or, first level villagers or something like that. If you, running through a funnel, like, say, Dungeon Crawl Classics does. If you're running like a 0 level funnel with multiple characters per player and whoever lives turns out to be their character. But it's just my opinion. I know some people are like, well, they prefer to have their players know all about the different monsters and things like that. To me, once again, I just kind of veer towards the old school because I sit there and I really, really dig the surprise that you can throw out at players. And I have got to be honest, I have not run a ton of fantasy role-playing games in my decades of RPGs. It's mainly been Call of Cthulhu, but I still like the mystery. I like the mystery that the players, especially running into a monster where they're like, what the hell is that? What the hell does it do? Should we kill it? Do we talk to it? What do we do? I like that aspect. And to me, that's how role-playing games should be. Role-playing games shouldn't be where you just, you're on an adventure and, in the game master's like, oh, well, you're on across some goblins. Oh, and there's a kobold. Oh, and there's a couple of orcs. And everybody at the table's like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what these guys do. Oh, is that an orc shaman? Because I know the orc shaman's got access to these spells. And I don't want that. I don't want that at my table. All right, so then we get the bestiary. And I like the fact the bestiary squeezes in a lot of stuff. You'll find that on most of these pages, you're going to have 3 creatures or monsters, what have you, on the pages. So there's not a ton of creatures and monsters in the squigs. I just got a kick out of the squigs. They're kind of funny minis. I love the paint jobs that people do on the squigs. They're always really nice. So I do want to point out there's not a ton of monsters and creatures and things like that, but there's a good amount. You're getting about as many creatures and stuff like that as you would in some standalone bestiaries that are out there. Because figure, and I'm not knocking Pathfinder, but if you look, especially at Pathfinder, you get these stat blocks for creatures and stuff, and it's like, my gosh, how do I use that at the table as a game master, right? So one thing I do like is that it's pretty concise. Yeah, everything's kind of, you could copy this stuff down pretty quickly. But then again, this also kind of goes back to the fact that Games Workshop, they were more miniature gamers, miniature game designers than they were role-playing game designers. So it did have, first edition did kind of veer a little more towards being not a true RPG vibe that people were used to. There were some things about this, the first edition of this, that kind of threw some people off because it was more kind of rule mechanics that were based on miniature games as opposed to fantasy role-playing games. But then again, look at Dungeons and Dragons, right? I mean, come on. Where did D&D come from? It came from chainmail. And after that, it was chainmail and Dave Arneson's kind of own Blackmore take on things. All right, so kind of finishing up here. Got the character sheet. Character sheet is dual-sided, so 2 pages basically to it. We got our index. We got our 5 Grim and Peerless Scenarios by Graham Davis, who I had an opportunity to meet at Gen Con, do an interview with, and I also taped his talk that he gave about, oh my gosh, now I'm zoning out on the campaign, the big campaign. The Enemy Within, which is actually a very, very famous role-playing game campaign, not just for Warhammer Fantasy, I'm talking for any fantasy game. I do want to point out that there is also, I believe, a free introductory adventure that's available for download. That's one of the things that the core book does not have. There is no introductory adventure, which I gotta be honest, if there wasn't one that was available for you to download, I would be dinging this a little bit for, because that's something that I really, really look for in role-playing game core books, is even if it's just a short 8-10 page adventure, something to kind of give the game master, a sense of, oh, okay, so this is how the adventures kind of go. All right, so that is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition from Cubicle 7 Entertainment, as well as Games Workshop. So, what do I think? Let me grab a sip here, because I've been talking for quite a while. Regardless, if I happen to be friends with Dominic McDowell and TS over at Cubicle 7 Entertainment, they know if I didn't like this, I would tell you wasn't a huge fan, right? Reviewed Cthulhu Tales. I thought it was okay, as you know, that's their kind of card game. That's sort of like Hobbit Tales, although I liked Hobbit Tales better than I did Cthulhu Tales. Now, granted, I'm pals with these folks, but I gotta be honest, right? Well, don't have to worry about that with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition. I think this is a really, really good book. I think there's a really cool system. It is not going to be for people who are looking for the big, 20th level character. And, I want to get to the point where, my spells can rend the earth and I can grant wishes and things like that. No, this is not going to be somebody who's looking for that, really super powerful, really high power creep sort of role-playing characters. It's just not going to be like that. For one, the setting's not like that as well either. This is certainly not a game for those who are afraid that their player characters are going to die. One of the aspects of 5th edition that I guess some people have a beef with is that it's kind of difficult for the player characters to actually be killed. As long as they got some downtime to rest a little bit, they can get all of their hit points back in about, I think it's if I remember right, I think it's 8 hours. I think it's an 8-hour rest. You get all of your hit points back. I don't have a beef with that. I mean, in terms of Dungeons and Dragons, yeah, fine, that works. Here, not so much. This is, your characters are not going to be these fantastic, amazing heroes. They're going to at least especially start off as just being kind of a step above the average folks on the street. And to me, I think that's cool. I like that. I happen to like the kind of grim, gritty sort of feel. I'm not a grim, dark kind of guy, but the old world isn't really grim, dark. It's just sort of dirty and down to earth kind of setting with chaos gods and magic and fantasy aspects to the game. As far as the actual setting itself, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay has more of a European setting. And you could easily actually run games where you're looking at just kind of doing a 13th, 14th century sort of role-playing game and kind of toss out all the fantastic elements of it. You wouldn't want to because you're missing out on a lot of the fun, but you could certainly do that. That said, so it's in my opinion, I don't think this is for the folks who are the sorts that want to eventually have these 20th level characters and things like that. That's pretty much the only sort of people that I don't think this is a good fit for. If you're looking for a game that's got a little bit of a sense of humor, a little tongue-in-cheek, it takes itself seriously, but it doesn't take itself overly serious. Just look at the Rat Catcher, right? The Rat Catcher class. If you're looking for a game where you're going to be doing a lot more role playing and kind of diving into the character themselves, as opposed to playing your character based on your min-maxing of stats, you're definitely going to dig Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I like the artwork. I think the book is jam-packed with info. Even though it's 352 pages, it's not as long as some core books out there, but because there isn't really a bunch of two-page art spreads and full-page art taking up a lot of space in the book, I think you're getting just as much information. And I love the magic system. I like the magic system that's got a little bit of danger to it, a little darker kind of rub to the magic system. Once again, as I said, it's not high fantasy. So very, very cool. If I compare it to the 1st and 2nd edition, I can't really. I don't recall ever looking at, 2nd edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and it has been a long time since I read the 1st edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So I definitely do recommend it. If you already have one of the first 2 editions, I would say it's worth picking up. I would certainly recommend picking up. Maybe you don't want to spend $60 for a hardcover book. If that's the case, by all means, pick it up in PDF. As I mentioned earlier, it is on sale right now in the New Year, New Game sale. So all in all, I happen to give Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay a 9 out of 10. Only thing that I would like to have seen in this would have been a little more information about the background, the setting itself. I found that to be a little slim as far as the Reekland. Would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that in it. That's really kind of about it. But because it doesn't have a lot of the background info, and then of course it doesn't have the adventure, which I'm not dinging the score for, but not having an adventure also does not give the game master a lot of info about the background of the world, because not everyone is going to come to this game well versed in all things Games Workshop. It's just not going to happen. I'm sure a lot of them will, but I like to see a little more info for the noobs out there in the book itself. But still, 9 out of 10. Certainly recommend it. And if you already have the first 2 editions, 3rd edition, I'm clueless on. I know a lot of things were different with the Fantasy Flight Games 3rd edition. But if you've got the first 2, definitely pick up this 4th edition. If not in hardcover, then in PDF. All right, so that is it for today's show. As I mentioned on tomorrow's show, I am going to unbox and take a first look at Master of Wills from Stormcrest Games. So, if you got nothing cooking, hey, Viper Dave's popping in. Jeez, Viper Dave, you're always zipping in like at the end of the show. It's like, no, I'm just kidding. I don't know. Maybe you've been watching for a while. Good to see you, Dave. Glad you're stopping by. Anyway, I am going to be taking a look at Master of Wills on tomorrow's show. So, as I like to always point out, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you check out a few of the Gaming Gang channel videos and you like them, by all means, please subscribe. And when you are not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, please visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, comics, movies, TV. By now, you probably know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Have a great Thursday night. I will be back tomorrow. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Thanks again for watching The Daily Dope, presented by The Gaming Gang. If you like this episode, be sure to give it a quick thumbs up. And if you dig the channel, please subscribe. If you'd like to check out our previous episode, click right here. And if you want to check out a somewhat randomly selected episode, give a click right down here. It'll be like opening a box of Cracker Jacks. You just don't know what you'll get. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'm Jeff McAleer.